I want to start by making a relation to the panels before, and there was a fascinating discussion about bringing the interaction with ATMs to your personal, accessible, optimized device. And if we think this a bit further, we want to integrate these activities into one ecosystem, and this we might call in the future still e-banking. So you prepare your interaction with an ATM at home, in a care environment or whatever, with your personal budget, whatever you have, many aspects respected. Then you go to the terminal, and only the minimum interaction is done at the terminal. Might be a thing, but the issue is the e-banking itself, which we do with a broad variety of devices, has to be accessible, and not only accessible in a legal sense, as discussed as well, usable, accessible, that really the user experience is taken into account. And this is a complex issue. The World Health Organization talks about, roughly calculated, 1,400 categories of functional limitations. Can we expect the banking sector having the knowledge of all about them? And I have to be a bit heretic to ourselves, the organizers. I'm part of the AccessibleEU consortium. One group which is not well represented here is the group of service providers for people with disabilities. A lot of people with disabilities live in the environment of their care supporters and so on. And we have to integrate these services into this domain. But here I want to stop and want to come to the e-banking, where we use this multimodal, as said in one of the panels before, multimedia interaction, which allows adaptation to the diversity of needs of people with disabilities. Of course, the window is small. Of course, it is not ideal, but we see a tendency going towards that. And if we make this accessible, what everybody is using, we have a big chance that inclusion can be supported. We look today into accessible e-banking, and I'm proud and happy to have a distinguished panel of experts with the view from policy. Mariana Santos from the DG Financial Stability, Financial Services and Capital Markets Union. From the industry view, Lisa Andexler, project management at Keba, handover automation in Austria. So we had to travel to Brussels. We are both from Linz, and we met here the first time. Funny thing. And finally, the user perspective, Andreas Hafsberg from the EBO board member and board member of the Norwegian Association of Blind and Partially Sighted. I do a bit an uncommon thing. I let the male person in the panel start. Why? Because we want to start with the user perspective. And therefore, I would like to ask Andreas to give a bit an idea of the expectations, what e-banking should provide, how e-banking should respond to the requirements, the diversity of needs of end users. Andreas, please.
Thank you very much. I am visually impaired myself, so I see approximately 5 to 10% of what is normal because of albinism. I am, as Klaus said, active within the Association of European Blind Union and also the Norwegian Association of Blind and Partially Sighted. And we are of the opinion, and we think it is a right, that people should be able to own their own money. I should be able to decide over my own funds and have a good overview of what that means. That means both in a payment situation, I should be able to decide myself what I pay and to who and how much. I should be able to control that as everyone else does in society. In addition, I should be able to have access to my account information as everyone else does, to see how much money do I have on my bank account, what have I used my money on lately, etc. And the third thing is all the other kind of services which maybe aren't always daily banking activities, which will also have been mentioned here earlier, like signing forms, sending in loan applications, doing other kind of financial business. They should be available to me in the same way as they're available to all of you. Very often that is a bit difficult, both because sometimes the user interfaces aren't accessible. Maybe they are accessible, but they happen to have just changed for some reason. There's a new version of the online banking coming. There's a new version of the app. Maybe the ATM has something new features, and then I have to do things in a different way from what I've learned before. Often learning new services can also be a challenge. And in such a way, it can be challenging to use. I think all visually impaired people and disabled people, they want to be included. We don't want to have special solutions for us. We want to be a part of the mainstream society with the same possibilities as everyone else. So very often I want to try to sort of say that we don't want to be part of the digital illiterate part. We don't want to necessarily have specific usages or specific solutions made specifically for disabled people. We want to be a part of the mainstream solutions. And that's what's important with universal accessibility and universal design. Sometimes I say to myself, it would be great if I was 10 years younger, because there's so many new electronic accessibility, there's so many new electronic services. So, I mean, it's a great and fantastic world out there. But on the other hand, when I see how much society sometimes has changed to being a digital-only society, I'm maybe very happy that I'm not that young after all sometimes. So the important thing from our point of view is to make sure that accessibility is included from the start. It's part of the design solution. And I think we have many examples where that has not been the case and where accessibility has been left out and is difficult or impossible to rectify afterwards. And I think maybe the payment terminal discussions, which we've had a lot of today, is a very good example of that. Because when it comes to entering or using a payment terminal, I want to be able to know what I'm paying, how I'm paying, and to who I'm paying before I confirm a transaction. How do I know if I can't see the screen on the display what amount I'm paying? How much did the waiter at the restaurant add to himself in a tip? How do I know how much things cost? I mean, yesterday I was out ordering food. There was a touch screen. I've got some help from the guy working there to select the food I was going to have. And afterwards, I had no clue what I was paying. But I wanted some food, so I just had to pay. I didn't really have any option. The second thing is there's an easy way to solve how to use a entering of a PIN on a payment terminal. I think many of you have seen it already. It's called a PIN pad. Why on earth isn't that being used more today? Why do we have to move to touchscreen displays when a perfectly okay solution with a keyboard with 10 or 12 keys on works for everyone today already? And it satisfies all requirements with PCI, DSS, and all the other standards and security. To me, that is the obvious solution, at least until other solutions are properly tested and work correctly, like Daniel here was showing earlier, for instance. So I think there could be a lot done to improve usability. I think education was mentioned here earlier as an important thing. It's difficult sometimes to know how to use solutions for everyone. So I think that's an area which needs to be addressed. And also this with user testing. I think many of the people developing services, whether it's banks or third-party providers, can do a lot and learn a lot by actually getting real users with disabilities in and seeing how they use the products, or maybe in most cases, how they don't manage to use the products. And I'm very happy that the European Accessibility Act now is in place, because as far as I can see, this is needed. The banks and third-party service providers, do not manage to do this without some legislation in place which makes them do it. So I'm very interested to see how this will actually make a change, and I'm really crossing my fingers for that the world will be a better place after the EEA is now implemented. Thanks.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you very much for this nice overview of the user perspective towards accessible e-banking. I would like to go on and Mariana Santos. We are celebrating the European Accessibility Act. The 28th of June will be a new bank holiday for the accessibility field, perhaps. So we have to take off a day to celebrate, of course. But the implementation, so to say, has an impact on activities like in the DG Financial Stability, Financial Services, Capital Markets Union. What is the view of this DG, the European accessibility, and how will this, based on the work you do in the DG, how will this, so to say, influence the activities, and how will the EAA impact on the work of your DG?
Okay, thank you. Good, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and good afternoon to you all. I'm Mariana Santos. I'm a policy officer in the team that deals with retail payments. So my intervention will be very much limited to the work we are doing on the payments front, retail payments front. And in that respect, we are busy with the review of the legislation on payment services, which revises the current Payment Services Directive, PSD2. And one of the important pillars that was introduced by that legal framework that contributed massively to make payments safe, secure, was, as you may know, strong customer authentication. This is the two-factor authentication based on two elements that can be an element of knowledge, such as a password, an element of inherence, which is something that the user is, biometric, think of biometric, for example, or something that the user has, think of a card, for example. Now, this has to be applied by the provider of payment services in certain circumstances, such as when you're accessing your payment account or when you are making an electronic payment. And why am I saying this? Because when reviewing the rules on payment services, we reviewed, of course, the application of the requirements on strong customer authentication. And there were two conclusions that I think are relevant for our discussion today in the context of this panel. One was brought to our attention by some stakeholders during the consultations we have conducted when reviewing the PSD2, was that over the years of application of SCA requirements, it became normalized that the elements of SCA should belong to two different categories. So either knowledge and, well, the two different categories from the three that I mentioned, knowledge, possession, inherence. And that this was perhaps, according to, again, this feedback we have received, this could be potentially blocking some innovation, particularly in the field of biometrics, blocking some innovations that could importantly enhance accessibility and therefore improve the access of users, of all users, to the protection that SCA granted. And for that reason, when preparing the proposal for the payment services regulation, one of the changes to the SCA framework we thought to introduce was precisely to introduce a clarification that the elements to be used in strong customer authentication would not necessarily need to come from different categories, as long as the key criterion for their security, which was that their independence, insofar that the breach of one would not compromise the other, as long as these key criteria could be preserved. The other conclusion during the review of the PSD2 that led to some changes in the framework for SCA was, well, whereas this first one pertained precisely to technological innovation and the pervasive use of technology, the other conclusion was, on the other hand, also that the dependency of the application of SCA on methods requiring a smart device was also leaving some users behind in terms of benefiting from the protection of strong customer authentication. And for that reason, another change that the Commission has proposed to introduce with the PSR proposal was precisely to require the providers of payment services to develop methods for authentication that are adequate to all the user situations, and in particular to provide a method of authentication that does not depend on the possession and the use of a smart phone. Now, this voice recognition, use of smart card readers can play a role in this respect. And we see such requirements as complementing the accessibility requirements of the European Accessibility Act. Well, yeah, I would say, I think I'm extending myself a bit too much, and I'll stop here for now.
I could listen for hours to you. Thank you very much. And in particular, seeing this innovative aspects for the possibility of identification security, which was discussed before in the panel as a major issue in terms of accessibility. This is very interesting. Let me come to our third panelist, Lisa Andexlinger from the company KEBA in Austria, ATM producers and ATM producing company. In particular, business to business, so they provide the layers for the different banking services, making them available. And I'm looking very much forward to your approach to e-banking accessibility and accessibility in general. Lisa, please.
Thank you for the introduction, Claude. Thank you for the opportunity to being part of this event. As already mentioned, I'm a product manager at KEBA. We are making ATMs and non-cash terminals for the European market. And I think when we talk about online payments and make it more accessible, we often think about apps and websites. But I think we shouldn't forget one thing, that access starts with presence. And there are still many people who need to use self-service terminals to have the opportunity for a secure and familiar touch point with their bank. And as we heard in the morning, there are still lots of situations where you need a terminal because it's not possible to do it with your e-banking. And as a hardware manufacturer, we are now at the point, like, we are looking for opportunities to make our terminals more easy to use and what to change. I heard a lot about payment terminals. We are making the ATMs, but we kind of have the same problems. So thank you for the opportunity to being part of this important event.
Thank you, Lisa. One question to that. When you talk about manufacturing and providing ATMs to the banking and financial industry, how far do you see e-banking as part of the ecosystem? So to say, are you focusing on the machine itself, or how do you approach, so to say, or do you approach a more comprehensive ecosystem, how the users, how the banking services are working?
In the past, it was always like e-banking is once and like banking at the bank is the second. But now we are putting it all together because, as you already mentioned, we want to have the opportunity to like start all of your e-payment on your mobile phone, and you just have to go to the ATM, put your phone on the NFC reader, and you can just do all of the transactions. Or if you need to sign something in physical, or you need to hand in some papers for the bank, you can just prepare everything with your mobile phone and then go to a terminal and do everything by yourself. And I think it's now we have to see banking, e-banking, and like cash and non-cash as once, and we need to get one solution. And we had it also in the morning. It's like we should have one unified UX design, or one unified usability to the e-banking and to the ATMs, and that's really important.
One more small of interest. You talk business to business. When you're contacting the financial players, business organizations, do they demand for accessibility already?
To be true, they demand since January 2025 because of the European Accessibility Act.
Yes.
So they do it now, and we heard that it was necessary to do this step in the right direction, because we had it as a manufacturer, right? We had it all the time. Our hardware is accessibility or accessible, but even from the banks or the financial systems, like we are installing the audio plugs. It was an example in the morning. We are installing them, we have them in our tellers, but I know that in all more than 50% of the ATMs we sell, the function for this for the audio guidance is disabled. And now is the change, because we have the European Accessibility Act, and now we can work on that. And I think it's a good start, but we should stay on that way. It's very important.
Thank you.
I have a
Andreas
question,
wanted
if
to
I
respond.
may.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I was thinking a bit about the secure customer authentication policy, because my experience is very much that in usage, there's a lot of focus on having them accessible. But what about the issuing part and all the administration around it? Because if I'm going to get myself a multi-factor authentication solution, it's very often difficult to persuade the person at the bank that I actually can use it myself, because they don't know how accessibility works. Or it may be difficult sometimes to actually get the process done that you need to do to identify yourself sufficiently. Is that something that you've been looking at as well from an accessibility point of view?
Well, I think at the core of the change, sorry. I think at the core of this new requirement introduced in the Commission proposal was precisely, I mean, the article actually has two paragraphs. One, that the providers of payment services need to make available a method of authentication, I'm paraphrasing, a method of authentication that is adequate to all users in all circumstances. And this is very vague, I understand that, but I think it's intended. And the second one, that this method should not be entirely, this should not be a single method reliant on the use of a smart phone. Now, I think maybe it's relevant to take the framework is under the negotiations now currently. And I think perhaps, I mean, this is public. I mean, both co-legislators have reached their positions. And I think something that is relevant and will help moving the text forward as we move on to the next stage of the negotiations in trilogues. For example, I'm thinking now in answer to your question that the council approach, for example, introduces precisely a requirement for the providers of payment services to make sure that the users are informed of all the possibilities to perform authentication in this regard, and also that they get the support they might need should they need support using these methods. I don't know if this answers.
But nothing specifically on the issuing process.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by the issuing PSP that issues the payment.
Yes, exactly. I mean, when I get them, I need to authenticate myself in some way, and I usually need to persuade the person giving it to me that I can actually handle it myself.
But your PSP issues your credentials, but I am sorry, I'm not sure I follow you. What
Okay,
but we can discuss bilaterally, of course. I'm sure, so I'm just not understanding the
Yeah.
question.
sure, thanks.
No private discussions. We want to learn about all together. Andreas, further on to that, I think the understanding is, and a bit of common layer of discussion we had is that we need education. So in terms of activities or approaches, we see we have the new approaches towards identification, 2 measures which are used. And I think there is, in particular, when we talk about myself, aging population, and so on, there is a bit of need. How can we do the training? How can we transfer the knowledge? Are there activities at the level of EBU, or do you even know also for other organizations of people with disabilities? Is this requirement of training, getting to know how to use the services, is this taken up together with the banking financing sector? Or, so to say, do you still not see such a movement? Because in any way, I think we learned there is a need to learn, to get acquainted with the new approaches and possibilities. There's a huge room of possibilities, but we only can use them if we learn them. Is there a thing where you are active, where you are working to?
I very much agree with you that the educational part here is vital, because I think there are quite a lot of services out there which maybe are accessible, but if you don't know how to use them or how the accessibility works, it doesn't really help you much. So we have definitively managed to identify this as a challenge. I think both on the European Blind Union level and also in many of our member countries. The challenge is a bit what to do with it and who has the responsibility for the education. Because very often you have various private service providers or public service providers who offer financial services, but don't always see that they are the ones who need to educate people sufficiently of how to use them. Sometimes people believe it should be a public responsibility to do this. At least we try to help people when we have the opportunity to do it, but sometimes it needs more resources than what's available. And you're a bit down to trying to learn things yourself. Or if you're lucky, you have some friends who can help you.
Thank you very much for that. And I know you are the wrong person, because, as said at the beginning, the disability sector, the service providers for people with disabilities, I think there is a strong need that they also take up the message about the potential of these basically accessible services, that they have brought to their clients for more independence, for more self-determined activities. And do you have some knowledge about such approaches, or?
Well, there are places where you can learn and go on courses, etc. But I mean, it's not always on a systematic level, and it's very much down to what individual service providers or organizations offer to their members, and a bit sometimes what the members request. I mean, I think maybe the example of an audio plug on an ATM machine is good. I was part of introducing that in Norway, where one of the major banks was swapping out their ATMs, and the new ATMs had an audio plug in it. But they complained afterwards that no one used it. And they said there's no need for it. And I don't believe that, but it's very much because, well, for the first thing, people who wanted to use the audio plug didn't have the habit of using it, and no one told them that it was there or how to use it. So in my mind, it's not strange that no one used it and that they didn't see a huge uptake of it. But again, how to just address those things? I mean, is it the bank who should be out informing people? Is it organizations for disabled who should be out telling their members? Or who has responsibility for it is a bit sort of vague. In my mind, I think both should do it. I think the bank would have a big incentive to use this more in campaigns to show that they are accessible and benefit a bit from the investment that they do. And I think also organizations for disabled have also a good way of showing how their members can function better in society.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Mariana, I'm sure your DG is not only working on security. When I think about, I'm not literate in financial things because everything I do, when I do something financial, I'm bankrupt. So I have to be careful, but the activities you're doing is in crypto or whatever. There are many financial activities. Does the European Accessibility Act, in the diversity of activities you have, impact? Do you see a trend that the European Accessibility Act has implications on more domains in your DG?
Well, again, I mean, the Accessibility Act, I see it a bit, I mean, like the GDPR, it applies across the board to the services that it will apply to. So it's not exactly it's not necessarily up to the legislative framework of payment to further spell out or even come up with new requirements, even if we can come up with requirements to complement, as I was saying, indeed, with regard to strong customer authentication. But with respect to making payments specifically more accessible, which is what myself and my team work on, there are a few perhaps interesting changes with respect to making retail payments more accessible. And I'm thinking, for example, of the framework for open banking. Well, open banking is a set of payment services such as initiation of payments or aggregation of information of payment accounts that was introduced with the second payments directive. And that now under the PSR proposal, there is one change that I have in mind here that has to do with giving users a better control of the access to payment account information that is given to these third parties. Now, so the PSR proposal introduces this requirement to have a data access management dashboard, where the users can overview and control what third parties service providers have access to their payment account information. And these dashboards, although it's a measure having in mind the data privacy, data ownership, and indeed what you were referring to users having a better control of their payment account information, their financial information, what is happening with their money in their accounts. This has accessibility in mind as well, to the extent that is clarified in the proposal that this dashboard has to be designed with the requirements of the Accessibility Act. I mean, maybe some would say that this would go without saying, because as I was saying, that the Accessibility Act would apply across the board, but I think it's an important clarification that is made here. Another aspect, another lever, so to say, of making payments more accessible, perhaps, which brings me to the interplay with other legal frameworks, is the specification in the mandate that is given to the European Banking Authority to develop the level 2 requirements for strong customer authentication, to take into account generally the need to facilitate the development of accessible services. This is a general requirement, but in particular to take into account the European Digital Identity Wallet that it will be implemented already as of next year under the new eIDAS regulation. And this European Digital Identity Wallet, which can be used for authentication, is under the eIDAS regulation, has specific accessibility requirements. So there is this interplay here that I thought it was relevant to mention with regard to making retail payments more accessible. And perhaps one thing I would add, taking into account the discussion on the information that is displayed to the users when making payments, one clarification that is made under the PSR proposal, and again, mind that this is it's a moving target still, and this is going to trial of negotiations, but there's one clarification that we thought it was important to introduce which is when a transaction, when the initiation of a transaction is considered to be remote. So when a remote connection is used, even in a physical location, that this is considered to be remote, a remote initiation of a transaction. And this is important for the purpose of applying requirements such as dynamic linking, which is the information that is provided to the user, linking precisely the amount and that payer before the payer is given the chance to authenticate the payment. Now, this, of course, is to be spelled out. The regulatory technical standards for these, all of these requirements of SCA is to be spelled out by the EBA, the European Banking Authority, in level 2 requirements. But when doing so, of course, all the other legal frameworks, GDPR and the European Accessibility Act, will have to be taken into account.
Thank you very much. I'm looking around the audience here. If there are questions, pressing questions, would like to involve the audience if you have questions to our panelists. Our Irish colleague said they are prepared to ask some awkward questions. Yes, please. Please wait for the microphone.
Anna Martin from BEOC, the European Consumer Organization. There's one aspect which was discussed in my panel previously, which I wanted to bring to this panel again, and particularly I think also to Mariana, is this aspect of, we have now the EU Accessibility Act, we have standards on accessibility. Now the big challenge which I'm seeing is how to bring them really to the discussion of the banking sector. And there is perhaps a question which is a bit easy and straightforward, but do you as FISMA have really a full picture of the problems which we are currently having for people with disabilities in the sector of retail banking? And is that maybe perhaps a starting point to map all those problems and to identify which kind of problems are in the sector really of financial services? We spoke about payment terminals which have certain security standards which prevent then again accessibility standards to be implemented. So question to you, where do you see now the starting point to really smoothen the implementation of the EU Accessibility Act in the area of retail banking?
Do you take more questions or?
No, please.
Thank you, Anna. There are two levels of my reply to that. First is during the review of the PSD2, there was a public consultation, a targeted consultation as part of the evidence gathering process that the Commission used to prepare the proposals for the two acts that are to replace PSD2. And it was precisely in the context of this consultation that we gathered this input that I mentioned earlier. One, that perhaps the requirement it's not really a legal requirement, but it's an opinion of the European Banking Authority on how the requirements of SCA are to be implemented, that the elements should come from different categories, and that perhaps this normalization of this interpretation was hindering and preventing some technical solutions that would benefit some users by allowing, in particular, the elements to be of the same category. So this was one input that was very clear to us during this consultation process. Another one was also, and by the way, Bill contributed also a lot in that process, was this need to make sure that SCA is not dependent on smart devices. So there was this was one moment of taking stock of the difficulties or perhaps the insufficiencies of the payment legislation framework with regard to accessibility. The second moment, and that one is ongoing, is in the context of retail payments stakeholder community, in particular the Euro Retail Payments Board, which is a forum of discussion of different stakeholders hosted by the ECB. There was a dedicated workshop on the implementation of a European Accessibility Act in payments, and the Commission is present as observers. We followed that discussion, and we engaged with stakeholders in the process of Q&A. So those are two moments that I have at the top of my hand, in my head, to reply to your question on when does the Commission take stock of the problems faced to implement the Accessibility Act in payments.
Thank you. Is there another question? If not, let me start my final for a question for a final statement. To start it, Lisa, you would have to make a decision, cash or digital euro, as a strategy for your company. What would you decide on?
For me, it's completely clear. It would be the ATM to change the cash to the digital euro. So
That's not a decision. Okay, your final statement, please.
I think we always have the discussion, how long does cash live in Europe, or do we have cash in the future?
Mhm.
I don't think you need both, but I think now it's important to implement and to get big the digital euro.
Thank you. Andreas, what do you recommend the members of EBU to the board? Cash or digital euro?
Both. It depends, of course,
That's
what
not a
you want to
decision.
do. I mean, back to this multimodal, multi-channel approach. You should be able to do what you manage to do in a way like everyone else in society does.
Mhm.
So, I mean, if the rest of society goes in one direction, I think that visually impaired people and disabled people should be allowed to go the same way.
And Mariana, when you do your regulation work, what would be easier?
Easier. I mean, well, not to be just to be a bit boring, I would go with both as well. Both are a priority, by the way, to the Commission for several reasons, I would say. Sorry.
Thank you.
And indeed, there are different vectors that go that for both as well. So not only the digital euro, but also the measures to improve the accessibility, the access to cash under the new payment services package, the PSD3 and PSR, for precisely to increase to improve access to cash, including in physical shops, in retailers, the possibility to access to cash in shops even without a purchase. And also, I mean, I'm thinking also on the requirements around ATM providers, that the PSD makes a lighter regime of authorization in that respect, which combined with everything that was discussed in the previous panel that I was following remotely on how the accessibility requirements apply to ATMs, to payment terminals, to all these read in conjunction will help hopefully making cash more accessible, because that is very much a priority still.
Thank you very much. I expected this Solomonic answers going for both, and I'm happy about this multimodality, different approaches that cherishes the individual approaches of users, and that's where we should work on in the future as well. Thank you very much to the panelists for their insights. Thank you.